to welcome you to today's webinar, Leadership and Development, Making the Right Decisions Under Pressure. I'm going to hand things over to our featured presenter. He is Executive Leadership Coach and Professional Development Consultant, Mr. Brian Ackles. Brian, you now have the floor.
Thank you very much, Kelly, and it's as always, it's a pleasure to spend some time talking about some of my favorite subjects in management, and this one ranks right up there: making the right decisions under pressure. This is something which we all do, whether we do it well or not, or whether we recognize that we make decisions under pressure or not. There's a lot of areas which impact how we make decisions, however, and that's something that we're going to talk about briefly for the next little bit under an hour or so. So some of the areas which we're going to introduce in this webinar, and I'm going to stress we're going to introduce them because we don't really have the time to dig really deeply into this, is we're going to talk about the complexity of decision making. And we think that we make decisions and we make decisions all the time, so how hard can it be? Well, it is actually quite a complex thing. There's a number of factors involved in this. Dealing with people's opinion and dealing with opinion in the face of uncertainty. How do we get past the influences of the organization, etc. And we'll also discuss and present a strategy for making decisions in this complex world that we live in, and this ever increasingly complex world that we live in, which is requiring us to make more and more decisions faster and faster. So let's jump into this. So from a business and organizational perspective, we make decisions within some kind of a context. And the decisions within an organization are made within the context of that organization. And they reflect what the organization is trying to accomplish, what the organization is trying to achieve. The decision making that we're talking about is not the decision making within your personal life. All these same factors do come into play. So really what we're talking about fundamentally is we're making decisions within an organization, and the organization has a strategy, and the context of the organization is built on this strategy. It's built on the goals and the objectives of the organization, and all of this is designed to fulfill the mandate of the organization. So every organization is designed to do something. New Horizons provides training, provides leadership skills, provides wonderful education platforms and programs for people. I work in a public safety organization, which our mandate is to save lives and protect people and property. You look at any organization, it has a reason for being. So in order to create that reason for being, organizations build their strategies to support that. And this mandate creates the drivers for the organization. Everything we do reflects why we exist as an organization. So they lead, the mandate drives initiatives, it drives projects, it drives changes to the organization, and it drives how we support the goals that we're trying to achieve. With all of these areas and all of these issues and initiatives and projects, these all require decisions to be made. Do we pursue this project? Do we pursue this course of action? Do we go after this customer? Do we pursue this business opportunity? And when we're in the midst of pursuing a project or working on delivering something, we have to make decisions. Do we use this supplier? Do we use that supplier? Do we put resources here? Do we put resources there? How do we juggle all of these decisions, and how do we make sense out of the chaos that we're trying to deal in? And that's what we're going to spend a bit more time talking about. If you really think about this and you really look at this, there's a mathematical complexity to decisions. Now, I'm not going to scare you off about math. Okay, we're not going to talk about math. We're not going to get detailed into statistics. We're not really going to talk about statistics much at all. We're not going to talk about numbers. But we are going to talk about two things which are really, really important when it comes to understanding how we make decisions at a human level. And there's really two dimensions to this, and that is probability. So it's the number of ways things can happen, and the impact of something actually happening. So how likely is it that something is going to happen? And we measure that probability in a number of different ways. Organizationally, though, you can take it as simply as high, medium, and low, or some variations on that type of scale. And then you look at the impact of something if it does occur. So if something occurs, what is the impact of that on the organization or on the decision that I'm trying to make? And we can gauge impact by it has essentially no impact, it has some impact, it has a significant impact, or it has a catastrophic impact. If you want to put some kind of scale or boundaries around impact. All this is to say, though, that these two pieces really are at the core of how we make decisions and the results of our decisions as we go through this whole process. And we do this every day, and we make decisions all day. We make decisions to a point where we're not even conscious we're making decisions. So let's jump into the idea of probability. So there are two types of probability. There's calculated and absolute probability, which exists when you know every possible outcome. Now, if you think about flipping a coin, there are two possible outcomes to flipping a coin. It's going to be heads or it's going to be tails. You can look at calculated probability of the chance of getting a 4 when throwing a dice, which is appropriately weighted and not gimmicked or fixed. You've got a 1 in, what, dice are 6 sides, you've got a 1 in 6 chance. So you know what the probability is of getting that 4 or flipping a heads or a tails. It's a calculated known outcome. Now, that's very important to recognize that you can calculate for certain things all of the possible outcomes precisely. And I'm choosing my words here very carefully. You have to know all the possible outcomes to calculate absolute probability. The reality is we cannot do that in business. And it's for the simple fact is there's human nature involved. And humans are not, we can't calculate why we do things. So then we get into the idea of theoretical or speculative probability. So this exists, of course, when you can't predict all the outcomes. There's some degree of unknown. There's some degree of, there's always going to be some degree of uncertainty. So we try and calculate, and that's, calculating the unknown. But in reality, it becomes a very subjective view and a very subjective assessment as to how probable something is to occur. Now, because there's subjectivity involved, all the calculations in the world really aren't going to be precise in any way, because how you feel on a particular day or the impacts of a particular environment could throw the calculations completely out. So again, it's how we think and how we deal with things, and we'll talk more about the human mind and how some of the factors that affect all of this. So theoretical probability. Some examples given here. How likely is it that a subway train is going to actually arrive on time? I mean, you would think that you could calculate all of the potential reasons for a train to be on time or to be late. But if you think about it, there's so many possible things that could happen that they're almost infinite in nature. An animal could cross the tracks. We don't know. We don't know what kind of animal it could be. There could be a freak electrical storm. There could be a power outage. We don't know. We don't know what the impacts of that. And if you start taking something as simple as a power outage, right? So if there's a power outage, the power outage will affect the train. The train won't get to the station on time. Okay, so maybe I can calculate how likely it is that there's going to be a power outage. Well, okay, so if there's a power outage, what caused the power outage? Well, maybe the power outage was caused by some repairs being done on the street, and the backhoe by mistake hit a power line. Well, Okay, how likely is that to happen? And on and on and on and on and on. And you can follow that path of logic until you drive yourself absolutely insane. The likelihood of weather changing throughout the week. I live on the west coast of Canada. We can't forecast the weather here to save our lives. It's supposed to have been raining for the last 2 weeks. We've had more sun in the last 2 weeks than I care to think about. It's been beautiful. I'm not complaining. But again, we can't really calculate all of the variables to know exactly what the weather is going to be. It's too complex. It's based on chaos theory. So we can get better at things. We can gather more data. We can sample more data. But it's really still how we interpret the data, how we frame the data, that is going to have an impact on our decisions. It's going to have an impact on our forecasts. So we need to make decisions in this thing called the real world. Right? The real world exists. Organizations are complex, they're a dynamic environment, and organizations are like the weather, they're difficult to predict. So this environment is all based around theoretical probability. So as leaders, as managers, as directors, as executives in organizations, we're really faced with managing this uncertainty when we're making decisions. And there's a lot of things that come into how we actually get good at doing this. So there's a lot of psychological factors around decision theory, and statistics influence our decisions. We look at the numbers and we say that, well, we know that in the past we've had success following this type of decision. But ultimately, making a decision is subjective and depends on not just the statistics of what we've done looking backwards, but also our own experiences, how we're feeling on the day. And there's a lot of psychology and a lot of psychological factors that really come into play here. And there's a few theories that we're going to talk about very, very, very briefly. The first one is utility theory. And utility theory is about the psychological context and perspective that you as a person exist in, and how that impacts in your decision making. So some of the factors in utility theory are a person's wealth. How wealthy are they? It's if you have very little money, if you're very poor, for instance, and you're making a decision, you're really not risking that much because you really haven't got that much to lose. And this is, again, based on utility theory. I'm not making a value judgment here. If you have a lot of money, if you're very wealthy, and you have potentially a lot to lose if you make the wrong decision. Your attitudes towards risk in life in general. How risk adverse are you? How risk accepting are you? Some people just go through life and they take all the risks that they can, and they accept them with perfect, they're just very comfortable with that level of risk. And fundamentally, it comes down to your life experience and how much life experience you actually have. And if you think about children and young adults, you think about and you look at the risks that we took and we all took as children. We did things that were crazy. If you look at it from the perspective of someone in their 50s, I look at climbing a tree, right? Things we all did as children. We climbed trees, we climbed everything. That's what we did, right? When I climb a tree now, I'm in my late 50s. The odds of me climbing a tree are pretty slim, because I'm going to be conscious of, well, if I fall, if I don't have the strength to hold on to that next branch and I fall, I'm going to really hurt myself, and it's going to really affect my ability to live. We don't think about that as kids. So utility theory takes into context your life experience, and it's all the decisions that you're making around utility theory. Really is about integrating all of these factors of wealth, attitudes towards risk in life, previous life experience, and trying to maximize the utility of the decision that you're trying to make. What is it fundamentally going to mean to me when I make that decision? So that's the idea of utility theory. So then we talk about anxiety and prospect theory. So people we tend to behave differently regarding situations of risk situations where they stand to gain or lose something. And this is the idea between anxiety and prospect theory, and we'll explore this in a little bit more detail. So if you think about anxiety. So perceived anxiety helps us or tends to lead to risk avoidance. And it tends to lead us to the inability to make a decision. So a big decision, right? Something which has in our minds or in our context or in our environment has a really big impact. And the example here is losing $1 million. Creates lots of anxiety, and it's a hard decision to make. Think about in your own personal, your own environment, your own business context environment. As I said, I work in public safety. If I'm making a decision which has a real potential impact on public safety, that's a very anxious decision. And I gather information, and I recognize that I do this, and my organization that I work with does this. On the flip side of it, very little anxiety makes decisions really, really easy. You go out and buy a lottery ticket. You're spending money, you're making an investment, you're making a decision to spend $1, but it's really $1 for a lottery ticket. It's not really happening anymore. But you're spending a very small amount of money. You're taking a very little risk for potentially a very large payout. And again, flip that into the organizational and the business context. There are some decisions that we make which really have no downside. The impacts of the decision, one way or the other, will either result in essentially no impact or significant upside impact. So this is the two sides of anxiety theory. And then you look at prospect theory, and people are willing to take a risk if they think they might lose out on something. So it's this whole idea of the fear of missing out. So they'll do something because, well, if they don't do it, they might not get it. They might not be able to do it later. So they'll take the chance. They'll make a decision based on what they may or may not be able to do in the future for fear of missing out on something. They'll invest in the stock market because they're fearing that they're missing out. And Bitcoin, for instance, is a really good example of this. People will buy Bitcoin, or people bought Bitcoin when it was exploding in value last year because they were afraid of missing out on the next big thing, the next big trend. And this is the idea of prospect theory. So it's just another piece of the puzzle when we start thinking about decision making. Fundamentally, though, if we look at human beings, we are irrational when it comes to making decisions. We're very, very good at accepting information that supports our own perspective. We're very challenging of views and arguments that don't support what we are already feeling, that don't support our perspective, our particular perspective. We all have our own personal lens of reality. We all think that what we think is quite normal and quite real and quite rational. We tend to believe that what somebody else thinks may or may not be as real or rational as what we think. And the way that we make decisions is, of course, based on reality, based on rational thought. And, we're very good at this. We know what we're doing. And the way somebody else makes a decision, well, you may not believe it as much. You may not think that they have the same ability or the same viewpoints. This idea of optional stopping when we're researching something, and this is very, very powerful. We start researching and we start looking into gathering information around our potential decision. We have to make a decision about something, so we do some research. Good, solid practice. However, human beings, we tend to stop when we have found enough research to support the decision which we want to make. Business analysts often will employ this idea of optional stopping because a decision has been determined by senior leadership, and business analysts are then put in place to try and justify that decision. So they find enough information and enough research to support what the decision has been made by senior leadership. And this is not, if you step back and think of it, it's not very rational. It's very irrational. We need to gather information that looks at both sides of the decision, and it's a very hard thing to do, to step back from what you truly believe and look at the other side of the argument. So again, we come back to risk awareness and risk perception. And really, if you think about decision making is all about risk. So we look at our own lens, of our own awareness and how we live and what our own life experience is. And this gives us a general perception of risk. So I'll give you an example of my own life. My partner and I have sailed across the Pacific Ocean in a 36-foot sailboat. Okay, something that most people would not do. We basically fundamentally came down to making decisions when we were planning this and actually doing this as to, if we make this decision, if the worst impact of this decision is that we won't die, then that's probably a decision we can make. If the decision is, if we do this and we potentially will die, then we really need to rethink that decision. So our risk awareness became very shaded by our life, our life's journey, if you will. But that's not your risk awareness. Everybody exhibits risk awareness in their own unique and different way. So there's an emerging field here of behavioral economics, which comes into play as well, about how we are becoming predictably irrational when we make decisions, which is an interesting observation. Predictably irrational. So as I said before, I mean, decision making seems simple, but it's influenced by a lot of things. We procrastinate. Everybody procrastinates to some extent. Most people don't really know what they want to do, or don't really know what decision they want to make until they actually see it. And we're very good at making decisions by comparing one thing to another. So we're comparing, if we're buying a car, or we're investing in a piece of property for the business, we're comparing the location of that piece of property or that building to the location of another building, or the potential of building something new, as opposed to buying something, to developing a piece of software in-house, or buying something commercial off the shelf. We make decisions by comparing one thing to another. And the other thing about behavioral economics, and one of the influences, we typically get what we expect. And this is a basic truth. If we expect something to be good, it will generally be good. If we expect something to be bad, it will generally be bad, because our expectations fuel our decisions, if you will. So our personal expectations influence the facts that we have, or our impression of the facts. So and we've all experienced this: comments when we're buying something, comments or online reviews, negative comments from colleagues, blog posts, etc. We do it when we hire people. We check references. I've been in the position in the last couple of, the last month or so, that I've had to hire a couple of new people into my organization. And one of the things I do is check their references. I mean, I interview them. I've had colleagues interview people, but I do have to check their references. And, I'm influenced by what their references and what the referees tell me. And of course I am. If I'm traveling for business, I'll often go online and I'll check hotel reviews for the particular property that I'm going to be staying at. Now, I don't know the people that have made these reviews. I have no idea what they're like, but I will be probably influenced by them. Now, again, I also try to take this with a grain of salt, because of that exact same statement. I don't know the people that have been making these reviews. I often want to talk to my suppliers to talk to some of their business references when I'm looking at making a significant purchase, and I'm in the process of doing that right now. I want to talk to people that have actually purchased this product and software and hardware platform from this company to find out how well it's worked. All of this, we look at information, and we gather information, and we're influenced by that information, and that shades our expectations. So all of this to say is, well, we have a challenge, right? We live in this complex world. We have to make decisions. We have to make them quickly, and we have to be able to respond to changes. If we roll back a second to utility theory, one of the things that strikes me about utility theory is that it's your previous life experience has a real impact on your ability to make decisions. So one of the ways to get better at making decisions is just to simply get a little bit older and live life. And living life, gathering as many experiences as you can, working in different environments, really helps you integrate different information in a different way. So we need the skills to make very decisive change and very good decisions. We need to be able to collaborate across teams. We need to be able to look at risks, assess risks, and forecast probability. Look at critical analysis and scenario planning. We need to be able to do all of this with not enough information and not enough time. And a lot of this comes into factoring our own experiences and our own brain's ability to make connections with information that we have that we almost really can't explain it. However, there is a process that can help you get past this. Not really get past it, but to help frame your thinking and guide your thinking when you're looking at making decisions. And it's a process that we'll spend the rest of the time talking about. So decision-making strategies for a complex world. So there is a bit of an action plan for success here. So it starts off with reviewing your plans, engaging your stakeholders, enlisting your network of contacts, managing the risks, of course, adjusting your decisions, building in controls and measures. It's a simple, it's a simple 6-step plan. Yeah, I don't think any plan that is 6 steps is simple, but neither is making complex decisions. Now, this really, if you take a step back before I dive into the details of this, looking at a plan for decision strategies. This is not something you're going to be doing to decide whether you're going out to buy a coffee or whether you're going to take your client out for lunch. Okay, those types of decisions are one thing. These are decisions which you're making in your organization, which have a significant impact on the strategy and the mandate of the organization, on the structure of the organization, on the well-being of your team, on the longevity of what you're trying to do, on the success or the probability of success of your projects, for instance. This is the type of strategy. This is the type of decisions plan or decision process that you would apply this to. So let's step into this. So the first one, reviewing your plans. So look at the business goals and directives. So if you're doing something within an organization, if you're executing a project or you're making a decision to pursue a particular course of action, does that meet the defined business goals of the organization? Does it support the strategy of the organization? Organization I work with is we've recently gone through a 12, 14, 16 months, 16 months strategy planning for the next 5 years. And it's rolled up into a series of 5 initiatives supported by a number of strategies, a number of strategies and actions to support those particular 5 initiatives. So when I'm doing my planning for my team and also for myself, I'm looking at everything that we're doing, and it has to have a particular support for those 5 key strategic initiatives and the business goals and the strategies behind those. So validate your plans. Make sure that they are in line with what your organization has defined. Look for something that's incongruous with your plans. Is what you're doing not supporting the strategy of the organization? Look at the stakeholder needs and concerns. And we all deal with multiple stakeholders in our projects, within our organizations, within the work that we're doing. Is there conflict? And is there areas of conflict or concern within your stakeholders? Do you have, for instance, is the finance department quite concerned with the amount of capital or versus operating investment that you're making in a particular project or a particular area. Does your delivery team, does your development team, are they completely behind and they understand what it is that they're trying to develop, and are they confident that they can do it within the time, or is there a lot of, yeah, whatever, I think we can do it, I'm not sure. And does the manager of that group or does the leadership of that development team going to go, well, we've never really done anything like this before, so I'm not really sure. So that's might be an area of concern for you. Look for areas of overlap and conflicts within other projects as well. Are you going to have resource contention with another project? Are you delivering at the same time as another project? Are you creating a perfect storm of events? We went through this earlier this year with the organization I'm in. We had 3 extraordinarily major programs of work coming to a head within a 3-week period. And it put an incredible strain on our technology organization because we have a limited number of resources and we have a limited ability to go to the street to actually bring on contract resources because of security clearance requirements. So it was a perfect storm. Now, we got through it by a lot of hard work and a lot of dedication, but and we recognized that this conflict was going to happen, but there was nothing we could do about it. There were contracts in place and there were commitments in place. But that was part of the plan review that we had to do. And have we shown that we have done some due diligence in all of our planning? So can we show that we've done the right thing in planning this all out? Engage with your stakeholders. Make sure that you're keeping people informed about what's happening and asking them for information, because again, information is what you need to make proper decisions. And stakeholder engagement takes time, and it takes the ability to have, it takes a certain set of abilities to actually engage with stakeholders well. You've got to have good people skills, you've got to have good emotional intelligence skills, you've got to be able to collaborate very well with people, you've got to be able to communicate with people really well. You need to be able to engage with people. And this is a very necessary thing to do when you're dealing in a very complex organization and you're dealing with the potential of a lot of change and you're dealing with potentially difficult decisions. Your stakeholders are the people that are controlling your resources, that are controlling access to information for you. They hold a lot of power and they can help you an awful lot when you're actually in the process of trying to make the decision. Work with these people. They are part of your network. You also have more people in your network than you may realize. We have, we have the ability through social media and through business forms of social media to reach out and ask a number of different people questions and look for information or gauge opinion, or simply to review information that's out there. So use your networks, use the people that you've met, use the people that you meet at conferences. If you go to a conference and you meet people and you get their business card, one of the first things you should do when you come back from that conference is go through those business cards. Put those business cards into your contact management database and put a note in for each person that you've met, why you met them, where you met them, what information they had for you, or why you want to keep the contact. And that's the other thing, is not everybody's business card that you collected when you went to a conference is somebody that you want to keep in contact with. Be ruthless about this as well. Prune your network as you go, but build your network and reach out to your network when you're facing complexity. Manage your risks. Managing risks. We've spent a lot of time talking about risk management in this webinar so far, and it really is fundamentally at the core of decision making. There is I wouldn't say a constant threat of risk. Threat is probably too strong a word. Risks exist, right? Risks will happen in any project or in any program, in any course of action that you take within an organization. There are risks. You need to spend the time to identify those risks, and you need to follow really good risk management practices. And there are good practices and they are available for people, and you can learn how to do this. There are really great courses on risk management. But risk management requires that you have a really clear and ongoing awareness of identifying risks, managing risks, forecasting risks, planning for risks, and just understanding the entire context within which you're working. So there's a philosophy around risk. If a risk event occurs, it's the worst time to think about dealing with it. So if something unknown, if an unknown risk eventuates in a project, for instance, then that's the worst time to deal with it. If, however, a risk happens and you have identified the possibility or the probability of that risk happening, and you've evaluated the impact of that risk happening, and you've already created a number of potential plans on how to deal with the eventuality of that risk happening, then you're in a much better situation, right? Then you can make a better decision as to which plan you should follow because that risk particularly happened. So risk preparation is done ahead of time, of course, but it takes time, it takes money, and primarily it takes time, which equates to money in most organizations, to protect the organization from risk, but to plan for it. You will identify many risks. Most of them will not ever happen. And this is the thing about risk management, and this is why it often falls by the wayside. Well, I did a risk management plan, and none of the risks actually happened, so why should I bother doing it again? I hear that comment, I hear that question. Well, the thing is, you do it again because for that one risk that did happen, you had a plan for it, and you don't know which of the risks are going to happen. Some are more likely, some are less likely, because again, this is about chaos theory, and it's about theoretical probability. You can't calculate all the outcomes. So risk response plans, you've got to balance this about in terms of how much effort you put into them. Dealing with risk can delay projects and can delay product launches, etc. So you're constantly making a decision as to how far down the road you're going to go with risk management. And that really depends, if you think about it, on, if you go back to anxiety theory, how anxious you are about the decisions or about the course of action that you're taking, that you're having to make decisions about. So if there is more at stake, you might want to spend a bit more time and money in risk preparation and risk management. If there's less at stake, then perhaps a more cursory view of risk management might be appropriate for that particular situation. But again, you're making decisions based on a number of other inputs and variables as well. So there's this idea of complex theory and the butterfly effect. We've all heard about the butterfly effect. We'll talk about it in a bit more detail here. So complex theory looks at anomalies and abnormalities and things that are nonlinear when we're making plans or decisions, right? So scientists have developed this idea of the butterfly effect. And the butterfly effect is simply that a seemingly small change or a seemingly small decision can have really huge impacts downstream. And the example I like to use is for those of you that drive on a highway and commute on a highway back and forth from home to work. And if you think about it, the traffic is moving along fine, and then all of a sudden you come to almost a standstill and you start crawling along. And you go a couple miles down the road, and all of a sudden the traffic starts to flow again. There's been no accident. There's no accident on the other side of the road, so there's no rubbernecking going on. And I akin this as an example of the butterfly effect. 2 or 3 miles ahead of you, somebody tapped their brake lights. One seemingly small event. Well, that small event cascaded backwards as everybody saw the brake light, and they started tapping their brakes, and that cascades back through traffic. And this is actually studied in traffic theory. So one small change had a huge downstream impact on your commute that particular morning when you got stuck for no reason in a traffic jam. So you need to look at these this idea of the butterfly effect and small changes, and consider the impacts going forward of a particular decision that you're going to make. A seemingly small decision. Am I going to hire a new person to supplement the team? It is an important decision for organizations, but it's not earth-shattering, and it's not going to make or break the organization. So you hire this person into your team. They have the right skills, they have the right skill sets, and we'll call that the small decision. And then that small decision turns out that although they have the right skills, they have the right skill set, they're not a very good cultural fit. They're very disruptive to the team. It starts to impact the team's performance. This person makes poor decisions, which you can't really interview for. Some of their decisions end up costing money. They end up costing quality. They end up costing time. They say the wrong things to the customer, and it costs you business. And that has a larger and cascading impact. So when you look at your decisions, and if you're looking at something in a greater context, try and do some scenario planning to say, okay, if I make this decision, what is the impact going to be? If it goes this way, what is the scenario? And you start mapping it out. Now, again, you've got to be careful not to get lost in creating scenarios. Try and keep it to what is real and what is likely to happen within your environment, within your context of the organization. Right? But again, it takes time, but it's a really good thing to do with a multidisciplinary team. You can bring people together and say, okay, we need to explore what's going to happen if we do this, this, or this. And you'll get some great viewpoints, and you'll be able to create some scenarios, which will help you, again, make decisions. Make sure your plans reflect the tolerance of risk within your stakeholders in your organization. Make sure that you're reviewing your business goals to ensure that they're ensure congruency with the overall mandate and the overall strategy of the organization. And if necessary, restructure, right? Change your plans, reflect and change, make different decisions based on what you've determined and what you've discovered, based on risk prioritization, based on a changing context. As projects grow, if a project is going on a long time, the odds of something changing are pretty significant. So you will have to adapt, and you will have to make decisions. Don't be afraid to do that, to ensure that you're still meeting the needs of the organization, the needs of your client, the needs of your customers, meeting the overall strategy and mandate of the organization. You need to make change and adjust as required. And build some measures, build some metrics, and build some measures about decisions. And prioritize those metrics so that they are of value to the key stakeholders in the organization. So this is, again, your talking to your key stakeholders, you're staying in touch with your stakeholders, you're finding out what's important to them, and you're measuring it and reporting it to them. So create valid key performance indicators, understand what your success criteria is, and understand what the high value targets are for your organization. So all of this is to say it's about communication, and it's about giving information back to the people that you are ultimately working with and working for. So this is the process that you can go. It's an action plan that you can go through to help you make better decisions. Okay, so as you go forward, you apply your metrics, you apply your data, you monitor progress, you monitor risk, you compare what you thought was going to happen with what is actually happening, and you look for new risks, and maybe you manage your risk to a point where you say, some risks have fallen off. We don't need to deal with those anymore. But again, constantly be looking at the information you've got available to you to help you modify your decisions and make different decisions. Look for trends in your reporting. Like, again, if you're gathering metrics and you're gathering data, you're going to see trends. You're going to see something potentially happening that you weren't previously aware of. And remember the idea of the butterfly effect. A small decision that you made a few months ago, and if you can trace your data back to that small decision and say, wow, that's really had a really much bigger impact than I thought it would. Remember the butterfly effect. So what we've talked about is making intelligent decisions. There's a lot around this. It's very complicated. It's very complex. But trust yourselves as well. Trust your life experience. Trust the knowledge that you have about your organizations. Talk to people. ask people's opinions on things, recognize that someone's opinion, and the context that that person is giving you their opinion in, understand where they're trying to understand where they're coming from. Reframe things, reframe issues, change your decisions, and look for information which not only supports your decision, but look for the flip side of the information as well. Don't fall into the trap of optional stopping. With that, I will end this discussion on decision making and say thank you very much. And if you have any questions, I'll be here for a little while to answer questions.
Thank you so much, Brian. And thank you again, everyone, for attending today's session. If you guys have any questions, we will remain on the line for the next few minutes. So feel free to type those in now and we can ask Brian those questions. Also want to remind everyone that this session is being recorded. You will receive the recording link likely tomorrow morning. So you can review anything that you may have missed in the session or pass on to any colleagues who were unable to attend. I also want to point you, if you are interested in any of our classes under our Center for Leadership and Development, please visit our website at newhorizons.com. You can find our Center for Leadership and Development there, as well as all of the courses available for you to sign up for, or you can reach out to your local New Horizons for further information. Brian, it looks like we don't have any questions today, so thank you again for joining us and speaking on behalf of New Horizons.
My absolute pleasure. Thank you.
And thanks again, everyone. Have a great day.